This is a football club named Real Madrid, but long ago, it just represented a group of Spanish guys that wanted to legitimize their team in a new and up-and-coming sport. And that is where this guy came in. But it turns out that this intersection between football and royal regalia doesn't just exist in Spain. So let's take a look at some of the biggest crown clingers from around the globe to see just how they came to be. Spain. Spain is the biggest offender on this entire list. Clearly, there are 23 teams that are all considered Real. Apparently, it started off in the early 20th century in Spain when football really began picking up, and clubs were looking for a way to make their name, their club team, seem like a bigger deal than they were, and to gain some notoriety. So, to do that, they reached out to King Alfonso XIII. And the first team that did that, Deportivo La Coruña, became Real Deportivo. The next club to do it was Real Sociedad, and apparently at the time they claimed that over the past 100 years or so, the royal family had been taking their summers in Sociedad, and so for that reason, they had a right to being called Real Sociedad. I don't know about that, but that was their argument, and it worked, because the king was all like, hell yeah, people are starting to not like us. What's a way to make us cooler, better connect us with the community, connecting us to what was going to be the biggest sport in the entire world. Football. But after Sociedad and Deportivo actually asked for their titles, a lot of clubs were just jumping all over it. So much so that the Football Federation asked for it in Spain and they got it. That's why it's RFEF. That's what the R stands for, Real. But it turns out that not all of these clubs had to ask for it. For example, Mallorca was just given it, or the king himself requested that Mallorca take it for some reason. But according to Madrid's website, they were granted it by a steward of the king. However it happened, they say nothing about ever asking for it, but it would stop a little bit, I guess, because there was one point that all these teams dropped the Real title entirely when the Spanish Civil War was going on, but then they all accepted it back during or after World War II because they were like, oh, it's our history, we want to keep it, which makes sense. That's fair. So a lot of the clubs went back to being Real Sociedad, Real Madrid. But you'd think after the monarchy stopped being the monarchy and being in charge of everything, they would stop giving out these titles because it wouldn't really matter, correct? No, not at all. The most recent team to get it was a team from the island of Tenerife in 2012. Wild. Welcome to my tier list of crown clingers. This is where we're going to rank some of the biggest teams that I speak about today to see if they are associated with royals for absolutely no reason, if it kind of makes sense, or if it's, oh, actually pretty cool. I'm obviously not going to go through every single Spanish team. I'm only going to go through Sociedad because there was the most information I could find online about how they got their name, and Real Madrid because they are the biggest club that has the title. For Sociedad, I'm just going to slide them into I'll allow it because I think that makes the most sense. They did it during a time where it was beneficial for them and for the crown to gain that title. However, I'm gonna have to take Madrid down a tier here because it seems like they're trying to act cool, like they didn't ask for it, just like pretty much everyone else did. So for that reason, I'm taking them down one tier. Come on, England. So the English crown doesn't have much of a title connection to football like the Spanish crown does. They probably just didn't want to waste any time considering such annoyances like football and wanted to focus on their normal pastimes of incest and rowing. Though the Spanish did dabble with the former as well. Also, YouTube tells me that only 2% of you are subscribed, so consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss my next video. But actually, there is one top 6 club that has somewhat of a connection to royalty, and that's Arsenal. Arsenal was actually founded by employees of the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich. So I'd consider that pretty cool, but I'd also consider that pretty royal. So for that reason, I'm putting that in actually reasonable. That's a reasonable connection. They didn't need a silly title to make them legitimate. They didn't need to add the Royal Arsenal. They just made themselves Arsenal. They actually dropped the title. More power to them. Now it's time for France. And you might be saying that, well, France has a little bit of a testy history with their royals. And that's true. But guess what type of people that didn't and were pretty close to France? England! And there just so happens to be a club in Ligue 1 that was created and founded by British expatriates. And that club is Le Havre, which is actually the oldest running club in France. But the reason they are important or they're royally connected is because one of their main chants is very similar to the song God Save the King. The club was created in like 1879 and it still has that today. So it defied 140 years. And I'm gonna have to put that in Savage because just to have a chant last that long, I think that's pretty cool. But not only did the English overstep their boundaries in France, what else did they do? They like to ruin things in India because there are several football teams in India that consider themselves royal, and several of them are actually defunct now. Good work, India. You ruined it. well done. They don't really need that connection. In fact, they shouldn't have that connection because of what the English did to them, but for that reason, it deserves a spot right alongside Real Madrid in trying too hard. It's Belgium time! So the deal with the royal title in Belgium, of what several clubs have, they have nothing to do with the crown at all. But actually, all the club has to do is to exist for 50 years, and then the FA will allow them to use the title royal in their name. But I feel like there are other words that could have been used to legitimize the club's existence for that many years than royal, but whatever. So I'm gonna just put it in, I'll allow it. It makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense, whatever. I learned a lot about Poland in this video. There are two teams that are still connected to historical royal dynasties in Poland, one being Jagiellonia Białystok and the other being Piast Gliwice. Really butchered that, I apologize. But the former's name dates back from a dynasty that happened from 1386 to 1596, and then the latter is one from 960 to 1370. I don't know what made these people way back in the day want to name them after dynasties, but I think that's cool. And because I have no desire to even try to pronounce those team names again, we're just gonna move the Polish flag here right into I'll allow it. Leave it to Iceland to make the naming of their clubs as legendary as possible. Literally, because the names of two clubs actually date back from historical legends in Iceland. But one of them was Fjolnir FC, and the other one was Völsungur Húsavík. And both of the clubs are named after people that might have existed in Icelandic history. Maybe they existed or maybe they didn't, but they are legendary names, Fjolnir FC. But because these people have reached like legendary status, or they are legends in Iceland, they are savage. It's the top of the list. Now that there's a new season upon us, you're probably interested in some of the new jerseys, the new kits. And if you are, consider using Fanatics. They have international shipping, and it's a great way to support the channel, as we get a kickback from every purchase that is made using our link. And you can find that in the description below. Now it is time to make fun of America. Look, the MLS is relatively new, and it doesn't have a ton of history. Sure, there are a few other leagues that did exist before the MLS, but each team didn't have decades, centuries of history like some of these other clubs do. There are 3 separate teams in the US that go by blank United when there's no history of them necessarily uniting with anything. These teams that are called Manchester United and Newcastle United are teams that were 2 teams at once and became 1 team, so they united. We just couldn't figure out the point of that and wanted to take that name because they thought it was cool. And honestly, I think that delegitimizes the club and the MLS a little bit when they're just copying historic European clubs for no real reason outside of being similar. On top of that, there are also 13 clubs in the MLS that use the name football club. We don't even necessarily call it football in America, but it is the original name of the sport, and so I think it is reasonable, but I think it is silly that clubs in America don't even call the sport by the name of the sport in the country. Does that mean the country should stop calling it soccer and start calling it football? Maybe. Will that ever happen? No. On top of that, there are 2 teams in the MLS that are just egregiously copying teams from other countries, and it's just not in the best taste, in my opinion. Starting with Real Salt Lake. Salt Lake City is where this team is located, is in Utah. I would be willing to bet that Utah is one of the states with the smallest Spanish-speaking population in the entire country. Yet they have a team called Real Salt Lake. I know for sure that no Spanish monarchy in history would have ever given a team from Salt Lake City the right to use Real in its name. So what, did they go to Oprah Winfrey and Elon Musk and ask for their permission of America to call it Real? Like what? It doesn't make any sense. But there's another club that's doing something that might be equally as weird, and that's Inter Miami. And I feel a lot weirder with Inter Miami's name because the whole story behind Inter Milan becoming Inter Milan was because AC Milan wasn't allowing international players to play with them, and there were a bunch of people in Milan that still wanted to play football, so they created a team and called it Internazionale Milan. Yeah, and it doesn't feel good because Inter Miami is this exciting team, it's bringing all this attention, but their name is just blatant copy. Come on, guys. Really? To be fair, I think I have more fun saying Inter Miami than I do have saying like the Houston Dynamo. But for the needlessness of that, they go right into America-wide. We don't need to do this. We don't need to blatantly copy it. I understand somewhat, but it's not necessary. It really isn't. NYCFC is a great example because that's a great title. It is so simple. Just football club after the area it is in. No matter how many teams and how many countries I've spoke about today, that is just the tip of the iceberg of clubs that are worldwide and have to do with royalty. So if you know any more, let me know down below. I'd love to learn more. But if you enjoyed this video and you are interested in Gavi or you're a fan of Barcelona, why don't you check out my last video, which was all about how Gavi came to be the person he is today. And it reveals a few things about his past that a lot of people don't really know. So it's interesting and I recommend checking it out. But thank you all for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.